The ways we make ourselves unhappy, and the premise of the talk is that our natural state is happiness, and that it is only things that we believe that aren't actually true that pull us away from that. We believe them, we act on them, reinforces our belief, and around we go. So it seems like it's useful to really look at what that mechanism is. If we become aware of the mechanism, then it loses its grip. What keeps it in place is the sort of unawareness of how it's operating. Because it's something that we've learned, all of us, whatever the particular ways that we get caught. Things that sort of pull us into, unhappiness or some variation of that. So it doesn't have to be sort of grievous suffering. It can be just little things as well, but it's the same mechanism. I mean, if we can see it in the little things, we have a better chance of seeing it in the big things, vice versa. So it can be, long-term patterns, or it can just be things that crop up on a daily basis, things that sort of catch us, sort of pull us into a reactive kind of space, where we're annoyed or angry or recall something. So we can talk about, there's more than 10, but we can talk about 10. You get a pretty good idea of where it's going. But and I think the reason that even though this isn't like hardcore spirituality, it's relevant in that any of these things can, sap our energy, just take us for a ride. And that's not necessarily in itself a bad thing, because every time that happens, that level of contraction or suffering or annoyance, or however we want to characterize it, is actually an opportunity. It's actually a pointer. So it's like suffering is always a pointer, and the usefulness is not to miss that opportunity. It's not, the idea here isn't perfection. It's not like, well, I got to try really hard never to make that happen. But it's really when it does happen, to say, oh, okay, here's it's not something I just want to push aside or run away from. It's like, okay, here's an opportunity to see something that I may not have seen before, or I may not have seen it completely, or it's just another opportunity. So if we look at it from that sense, then we have an opportunity to learn from it. If we see it as something that shouldn't be happening, then we sort of block that, because we're suddenly opposed to it, and it doesn't go anywhere from there. So that's one reason to look at it. The other reason is that even if we've gone down the path a long way into recognition of our true nature, recognition of consciousness or awareness, we can still be pulled back into it. And if we have a sort of a case of spiritual pride, it can be easy to say, well, that shouldn't be happening, right? Something's gone wrong, and we can go down that mental road. So, but again, if we see that even though we may have seen quite deeply into our true nature, it doesn't mean that on a human scale, we can't get hooked sometimes. So it's useful to see it in that way, that one, just because we've seen that doesn't mean, well, I'll never get hooked again. You can almost feel the pride in that, right? The arrogance in it. I have to use my crib sheet, otherwise I never remember all these. Okay. Okay, first one is being right. Okay. So you can sort of feel into that, like that the certainty of my opinion. I know something happened, and I know I have the right perspective on it. I have the right, way of how things should be. I'm interacting with another person, but I know I'm right. It's sort of like, hey, it's my opinion, and if I can't trust my own opinion, well, whose opinion am I going to trust? I remember when I went to college, there were a lot of people there that were a lot more sophisticated than I was, and one of the things I noticed is almost everybody had really clear, strong opinions about everything, and I was just some public school kid, and I didn't have any opinions, I didn't, I felt like somebody stumbling out of the backwoods and not knowing anything, and all these people all had opinions, really strong opinions about everything, politics, everything. So this sense of being right, has a certain there's a certain assertiveness there and one of the consequences of that is that the implication is that the other person is wrong, right, when you're talking to them. And I mean, you can do that in a friendly kind of way, if you like chocolate ice cream better than vanilla, you're just deluded. I mean, it can be done in a lighthearted way, but and it can also be done in a serious way if you're having an honest, sort of business-like discussion or scientific discussion that, where you can genuinely disagree with somebody. But that can be done respectfully, right? It's not like you're disrespecting the other person. You're just, you're maintaining that level of respect, but just talking about different ideas, different approach, okay? But it's different when there's that sense of assertiveness, certainty that goes with it. Like, I know I'm right, and I am going to stick with that no matter what, even if it costs our friendship, And you can see it happening in politics these days, right? So people will put, opinions over family relationships and friendships, etc. So what becomes more important is the concept rather than the person, the concept rather than the relationship with another, manifestation of life that you happen to be talking to. So that's that degree of certainty that goes with that. And in some ways, that level of being right, there's one of the payoffs of it is that you don't really have to consider the other person's opinion. You don't really have to listen to them. You don't have to get involved in the nuances of it. You don't have to consider, well, maybe they have a point here. If we, to the extent that we practice that, it's like, we don't have to get involved in those nuances. We can just stick with our opinion, and if we do it forcefully enough, then we win the argument, right? So, sometimes, we can be expressing opinion, somebody expresses another opinion, and then we go to, sort of an emotional supercharge there and add in an element of anger or disdain or dismissiveness or, something to amp up your position. And that it just creates that separation. So even when you're, just having a normal conversation with someone, and if we drop into that sense of certainty about being right, if the other person can feel that, and you can actually feel the disconnection, a point where that connection, that sort of undercurrent, gets cut. Suddenly you feel the other person sort of backing away, and that's the consequence of being right with assertiveness. Right? So it's just something that we can notice when we have that level of certainty, is to maybe back off a little bit, and just see that I'm seeing it from a certain perspective. I'm seeing it conceptually, right? Because I'm focused on an idea rather than the actual personal connection, and see that has consequences, right? Depending on how far we take this being right thing, right? If we take it far enough, we fly planes into buildings. It's the same movement. It's just, one's it's just a matter of degree, right? Okay, moving right along here. Blaming others, right? So the thing about blaming others for whatever, some lifelong, incident that happened maybe decades ago, that we haven't quite, well, we're still holding on to that resentment or hatred or unforgiveness or whatever it is. We hold on to it because, well, we know that they were in the wrong and we weren't, right? So there's that sense of, it just wouldn't be right just to let it go. Somehow there's an assumption built in there that, I'm the Lord of karma, and, if I let it go, who knows what'll happen. So somehow we feel justified in hanging on to that, but the actuality of it is that the person that is suffering as a result of our hanging on to it is ourself, right? So we get to suffer maybe for decades for something where we blame somebody else for, and we're just not willing to let them off the hook. The other thing that blaming the other person does is that it's outward looking, right? It's their fault. I'm the victim. Nothing I can do. They were in the wrong. I'm suffering. They're to blame for my unhappiness, right? So we've given away the key to our emotional well-being to the other person. They've done it to me, and I'm just the victim here. So, but the truth of it is that no one else can ever make us unhappy. They can do whatever they want. We may not like it, but the choice to fall into anger or hatred or unhappiness or despair or hurt or depression or all of that is our own choice. If we give that authority over to the other person, they're the ones in control of our emotional experience. It's like, I mean, just the bumper sticker, happiness is an inside job, you know. The trigger may happen outside, and that's something we don't have any control over. The other person may say something that's offensive, may say something that, is insensitive, may say something that's politically or, socially incorrect. We have no control over that. If we give them control over our emotion, then they're holding the loop end of the leash. Right? So what we can do is just see that our reactivity is something that is within our control. And when it gets out of hand, if we respond with anger, whether it's expressed or just happens internally, or disgust, or whatever the sort of contractive emotion is, we can just look and see, okay, there it is. That's something that I have the belief that they shouldn't have said that or done that, and I know, and that reactivity is justified. Okay, but we're still the ones that suffer for it. We suffer from, that bout of anger, or hatred, or whatever the emotion is. So that we do have a choice about, and we can relinquish that to another person, but we don't have to. So the pointer there is when we find ourselves reacting to the other person, whatever it is, then we can look and see what the root of that is. So it doesn't mean that we don't respond. We can respond as whatever is appropriate to the situation. But the difference is between response and reactivity is the level of contraction within ourselves. If we respond to the situation, it's done with. You've responded appropriately. The other person may or may not hear it, may or may not agree with it. That's out of your control. But what's in your control is to respond as best as we can in that moment. But if we find ourselves carrying the emotion, hours, days, weeks, decades afterwards, then that's on us. So again, that's the pointer. The suffering is a pointer to look at what we're believing should or shouldn't have happened. Actually, anytime you hear the S word, it's something it's like a red flag. Okay, look here. Okay, and the looking here is always here, not the other direction. Even if you can say, well, it's 90% their fault, and only 10% mine. So look at the 10%. That's what you have control over, not the 90%. Okay, moving right along here. I'll be happy when. Okay, so maybe when we were younger, it was like, well, I'll be happy, if and when, he'll ever go out with me. I'll be happy when I graduate and get a job, or I'll be happy when, I have kids. Whatever the future event is. Later on, it might be, I'll be happy when I get the divorce. I'll be happy when I'll retire. I'll be happy when the kids go off to school. But it could even be, just not even long term like that. We can notice it just, just during the day. I'll be happy when dinner's ready. I'll be happy when the dishes are done. I'll be happy when the guests come over. I'll be happy when the guests leave. It's like, it's always like just the next thing. It's like, but the implication there is, I'm not really that happy now, but when some future event happens, then I'll be happy. The problem is when, the future event happens, there's always the next thing. It's always sort of pushed back into the future somehow. Does that make sense? That's pretty straightforward. Okay. Wanting more. So it's like we look to the outside for, objects that we sort of bring into our field, or experiences, or thoughts and ideas, and we look towards those as the source of happiness, right? That'll bring me pleasure when I buy that, or when I move into that house, or when I have this relationship, or when I have this job, or something when I've brought it into my field of possession, I'll be happy. There's only two problems with that. One is that we have this hope of wanting something and it doesn't happen, right? A lot of things that we've hoped would happen didn't quite turn out that way. So that's one problem with this wanting more. The other problem is we do get what we want. We get what we want, but it doesn't quite turn out as good as we thought it would, or it doesn't last as long as we'd hoped it would. It's sort of like, yeah, okay, that's nice, but, and then there's something like, well, it could be better, so it's always, like if we get a newer car, and we park it in the driveway, the first night wow, that's a nice car out in the driveway. There's sort of a sense of pride, and, maybe the neighbors will see me driving my new car, and, that sense of, this made me happy. I bought this, and it made me happy. And then, a few weeks later, you get in the car and go to the grocery store, and you might not even remember that you had bought this car a couple of weeks ago. But if it was the car that made you happy, as long as you had the car, you'd be happy. But it's not ever that, right? It's not that the object has the capacity to make us happy. Right? The object is just an object. It's not trying to do anything. It's not trying to make us happy. It doesn't have that goal. It's an object. Whether we feel happy of having it somehow in our possession field of influence is only the thoughts that we assign to it. So again, it's only happening within us. Whatever our response is, it's only happening within us. It's not happening in the car. The car is just the object of our perception, but that feeling of, oh, I'm happy to have this car, can only happen here. It's not happening out there at all. Same with experience, right? Any experience. It's not the experience that causes the happiness. It's our response to whatever it is that we're experiencing. I mean, it's just like two people go to, I don't know, a hockey game, right? Somebody likes hockey, knows what it's about, and is enjoying the game. The rest of us go to a hockey game and can't make heads or tails out of it. And it's not that enjoyable at all. We're bored silly. Same game, right? Just two different responses to it. So I was once on a retreat at Mount Madonna with Adi Shanti, and there was a guy that got up and spoke. He was about my age at the time, and probably still is. And he told a story about how he had, in 1964, he had won an Olympic gold medal in swimming. And when I was in high school, I was big into swimming. I graduated in 1963, and I had some vague hope of competing at that level, which didn't happen. But anyway, I was interested in what he had to say, and what he had to say is that since that peak moment of achieving this world-renowned goal after probably 15 or more years of training, he never again experienced that level of peak happiness, which threw him into depression and drugs and alcohol and misery for the next 35 years. So here's somebody that attained, a pinnacle of, what most people only hope for, and it still wasn't enough. It still wasn't, it wasn't fulfilling to be permanently fulfilling. It was like, yeah, but I'd still need something more, right? Maybe drugs, maybe alcohol, maybe, who knows? So we can just see this movement of never enough. I mean, you can look at, Hollywood, win the Oscar, and at the same time, they're making their victory speech and, all that love and attention and envy, and, at the same time, you can see the underlying anxiety. What if my next picture's a flop? Where will they be then? It's like never enough, always not permanent, not enough. Solution, more. Right? More, bigger, better. More money, more power, more fame, more, sensory excitations, more whatever. It's all the same movement. We're just looking in different directions. But the key there is, it's the movement of looking for happiness out there somewhere. And the longing for happiness isn't the problem. It's actually very instructive that there's something innate in all of us that desires this sense of well-being, fulfillment, wholeness. But we're just looking in the wrong direction, right? So the looking is like, I long for, and I know I'll find it out there somewhere. But what we can do is just recognize, no, the longing isn't bad. It's just that I'm longing for something that can't give it to me, and just follow that longing back in the other direction. Where's the source of that longing? What is that about? And that's here. That's not out there. Okay, so that sense of wanting, rather than saying, well, I shouldn't want anything. It's instructive. It's like there's the wanting, but what do I really want? Rather than what will satisfy me for the next 5 minutes or this evening, or, what do I really want? And touch into that. Use the same desire, but use it wisely. Right? So this doesn't mean that, we shouldn't enjoy, going out with friends, watching a movie, having a good meal, drinking a glass of wine, whatever. It doesn't mean any of that. But it means like, if we're, it's fine to enjoy things in life, but when we're really looking at something ultimately satisfying, where do we look? And that's the opportunity, is to follow that longing back to its source, to see what's really being longed for. Okay, expecting the other person to change. Anybody ever done that one? The usual problem is the other person's doing the same thing and having about as much success with it as you are. So there's sort of a synergy going on there. But our thought process is often, well, if the other person was just a little bit more like this, then I'd be happy. Right? But the instructive thing is, we can look at just our own, like, ordinary habits and just see how difficult those are to change in ourselves. Even just simple habits like, exercising more, eating less sweets, or, flossing our teeth after every meal, or, just simple things like that. How difficult it is to discipline ourselves, to change ourselves in a behavior. It's not easy, right? There's something difficult about it in ourselves, but yet we expect that we can somehow induce the other person to do that. If they just change a little bit more like to my liking, then hey, things would be good. But we can see, if it's that hard to change our own habits, those are just easy habits, right? There are more difficult ones like, not being judgmental, not getting angry. They're more challenging ones. So if we see how difficult that is in our own life to see through certain patterns, we may be a little less insistent than that the other person should do that. And we can also see that the expectation for the other person to change is really an avoidance of what I can reasonably do, which I do have control over, which is, my own, looking into my own patterning. So that's the opportunity when we find ourselves sort of insisting, I'll be happy when the other person, acts more like this, and we can just see through, sort of sub-strategies like, trying to manipulate the other person into doing something more like this, or withholding affection, right? Withholding love and affection until somehow carrot-like you'll induce the other person to act more like this. Not that you've ever done that, but it happens sometimes. But these are just strategies, but it's again still outward looking, where we assign our happiness to how another person is acting. And then, our resolution for that is, well, I'll just get the other person to change, and then it'll be okay. But what we can do is look at what in ourselves requires that in order to be happy. Why is that essential to my own happiness? So that we can do, that we do have control over. The other person, not really. Okay, needing to be understood. I remember in my 20s, I was living in West Virginia, out in the boonies, not doing too much, with a few friends, and my dad came down to visit. My dad was a corporate type, but he was willing to come down to West Virginia and spend a few days down there. But where our relationship, which had been always strained, got to those few days was, you just don't understand me. Don't understand what I'm doing here. You don't understand how great this is. You don't understand, that this is important. And the underlying thing is, and which I didn't say, of course, but the underlying thing was, and I need you to. All right. So this has the real potential to make a person unhappy because, again, you've assigned to the other person a demand to understand me, right? The only problem is, the only reason that anybody would demand another person understand them is that if they don't understand themselves, right? If you understand yourself, why do you need anybody else to understand you? And, you look around, the vast, vast majority of people don't understand themselves, don't know why they're doing what they do, don't know why they're behaving or thinking the way they think. It's all just, mechanical conditioning, acting without really knowing why. And so if I don't understand myself and the other person doesn't understand themselves, what's to be gained by demanding that they understand me? There's just no point in it. There's no ability in the other person, any other person, to understand another person completely. Even if you've lived with another person, you might be very familiar with their patterns and habits and, what they'll do under particular situation, but there's something that still remains that's totally mysterious. Is that not true? Where you don't yet feel like you can just know everything about the person, not just their story and everything, but just the mystery of being with another being, and even in close contact for a long period of time. It's like there's still mystery there, right? The only time there's not a mystery there is when we've just conceptualized everything, put the other person in a box, a category. We know what they are, what they believe, and that's the end of the story. But if we've done that, we've reduced, a real live manifestation of life into a concept, and that concept will always be less than the reality of who the other person is. So this whole, demanding that some other person will understand me, this is something I think is, particularly as we're growing up and trying to, break free of our parent or parents and establish our own identity. We want to break free, but we sort of want their respect and acceptance and understanding of what I am, even though I've sort of broken away somewhat. So somehow, as much as we want to create our own identity, we're still sort of dependent to some extent on their love and approval. But just this, we can just see that demand can't be fulfilled, right? The demand that somebody else understand me just cannot be fulfilled. They don't have that capacity to do it, and the only reason that we're insisting on it is because we don't know who we are ourselves. So we can just look at that. The resolution is to find out what we really are, and then it's resolved. Okay, wanting to be loved. I mean, this one sounds totally reasonable, right? What could be more life-affirming than wanting to be loved? But the wanting to be loved puts the love out there somewhere. I mean, this is the basis of all romantic comedies. Somehow the fulfillment, my happiness, my life is dependent on whether the other person loves me or not. Whether that's coming back towards me. So again, we've sort of parked our happiness in the whims of the other person. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Basis of every romantic comedy, right? Will she? Won't she? No, she will. Yeah, we all know that. But that's the issue is that there's something that we feel like we're lacking in ourselves that we think the other person has, and that without their love towards me, that lack won't ever be fulfilled, right? So we can, sort of juice up that need, like, I need, if I don't, end up with this person in this relationship, my life will be over. Or maybe I've been in this relationship and now it's not, and I'll never be happy again. So again, it's still assigning that source of happiness to some outside source. Okay, lacking here, present there. What do I have to do to get that directed my way? So there's this, you can sort of sense into that sense of neediness, right? Like, how do I have to present myself? How do I have to appear? What do I have to do in order to gain that for myself, to fulfill this? I'm empty here, it's present there. I can't just outright demand it, so I have to sort of use these different strategies to try to pull that person's love into my field. All right. But if there's that sense of neediness here, almost always there's the same sense of neediness in the other person, right? Somebody that was, felt complete, content, at ease, okay with being alone, but not out of rejection, just content. They're not approaching another person or relationship with a neediness. It's just, if there's also just that inner sense of peace and contentedness in the other person, then it's quite attractive, right? You can sense if somebody needs something, right? Needs something from you, like I don't know, nobody's an insurance salesman here, right? So, but that sense of like, you're having a conversation and then suddenly, he's checking me out, like seeing if I need some car insurance. That level of neediness, it just isn't all that attractive. The only person that it would attract is someone equally needy. Like, okay, I'll love you if you love me, and as long as we play that game to each other's satisfaction, it's okay. But if I feel like you're wobbling, I'm out of here. Either physically or psychologically. So there's that tension that can be there. But if we feel like contented in our own being, and someone else the same, it's lovely, right? Because then there's just a genuine sharing. It's not out of neediness. It's out of a joy. It's out of just a friendliness, a joy in exploring life together. It's a whole different field. So even though that movement of wanting love is natural, it's again, where are we looking to fulfill that? If we put that expectation on the other person, sooner or later, that other person will not be enough to fill that void. Unless we fill it ourselves, to recognize what we are essentially, then there can be a sharing. Yeah. Okay, we're moving right along here. There's a lot more we could say about any one of these things, but Okay. Regret. Okay. Regret has to do with, things that we did, maybe yesterday, maybe 20 years ago, that haven't been resolved. You often hear people say that, if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have done that. Right? Yeah, of course. Hopefully, right? Hopefully you've learned something in the last 20 years. And but we somehow apply some standard that we've, either heard or believed or learned, over those years, and applied it to something that happened maybe a long time ago. And then we come up with, I shouldn't have done it. It happened. It's in the past. I can't change it. And therefore, all I can do is regret it. Nowhere to go with it. I can't undo it. That's what we're left with. And the regret actually blinds us to the opportunity to really see through it. Because it fixes it in place. It's like, this is what happened, and regret sort of puts it in a box of how I'm going to feel about it. And I can't change it. That's what happened. I can't undo it. And therefore, I'm condemned somehow for the rest of my life, carrying around this regret. Right? So I'm guessing we've all done things in the past that, we wouldn't do today. Okay, I'll raise my hand. So, naturally, this is actually how we learn, right? The idea, religion notwithstanding, the idea of this lifetime isn't to live flawlessly. If we're, if our standard is never to make a mistake, it's just an unreasonable standard. So it feels like, that sort of superego, higher self is the one that's holding us to some standard, and that, our unruly self is, not quite measuring up. And we feel like, at least I've got my standards, but I impose them on myself and then feel guilty or regretful or whatever. But they're both concepts, right? You know, this higher standard, some idealized self. You know, where did that come from? You know, is that really the standard? You know, it's some belief that we feel like that's what I should have done, and this is what I actually did. But it's actually how we learn. I mean, it's how we learn to walk. You know, we didn't get up and run across the room the first time we tried it. You know, we fell down dozens and dozens of times before we learned to do it. You know, and we've made mistakes in relationships. We've made mistakes in, you know, what we've said to other people. We've made mistakes in, I don't know, all kinds of things. Self-honesty. I mean, all kinds of things. But the question is, you know, if we sense into how we felt afterwards and realized, again, from the sense of contraction, aha, there's something there that I need to pay attention to because I don't like what this feels like. You know, so the body, in some sense, is a very good, you know, indicator. You know, the body feels contracted. Mind feels contracted. I mean, it's not wrong, right? The problem isn't the contraction. The contraction's actually pointing back to something that didn't feel quite right, something that our deeper nature knew, that wasn't quite right. You know, so the contraction's actually a useful function, sort of like, you know, you hit your toe, it hurts, and it's oh yeah, there's a rock there, you know, I gotta pay more attention. You know, so it's the pain draws our attention to the situation. So this idea of regret is just conceptualizes an event. We repeat it in our mind again and again. You know, we usually amplify it, you know, all the things that, you know, I should have done or they should have done, you know, all the nuances, you know, all of that just locks it into place more and more firmly. You know, gives it a reality that, but it also prevents us from actually seeing our own role in it, what we can learn from the situation. So, you know, regret sort of prevents us from actually looking at things. It actually perpetuates our suffering. Right? Just because it prevents us from actually investigating, you know, my role and how I ended up in a situation that I now regret. Nisargadatta has this phrase that karma is the indifference to our own suffering. Yeah, we don't quite care enough to really look at it, so we go on suffering. And Byron Katie says a very similar thing. He says, karma is just an unexplored belief. Some belief that we haven't really looked at thoroughly, so we go on acting out of that. The results are similar. And that's called karma, you know. Okay, about waiting for the world to change. You know, it's like, I mean, we can all come up with ways that we'd like the world to be different, you know, more to our liking. But when we really look at the world, I mean, it's not like the river's a problem, or trees are a problem, birds are a problem. You know, when we look at things that we see as dysfunctional in the world, they're all man-made. Nature, I mean, there can be some violent stuff happening in nature, but we don't say that lion shouldn't be doing what it's doing. It's just sort of the nature of things. But when we look at the dysfunctionality of the world, all man-made. Degradation of our food supply, warring nations, racism, greed, degradation of the environment, elimination of thousands of species. I mean, all climate change, all of that is driven by people. Just adds up. It adds up in a way that the result is what it looks like now. So but the source of it isn't, the source of it is this, on an individual basis, it's the sense of separate self. I am separate from all of that. I have these needs, this want, to fulfill something in myself, and therefore, I need more stuff to fulfill that. I need more power, I need more money, I need more control, I need all of that. And the consequence is the issues in the world. So we can try to resolve it on, sort of the world level. As long as we know we're dealing with symptoms, not causes, that's fine. But even then, we need to be careful. So it's fine to go out and try to make the world a better place, but it's worthy of some caution there. I mean, there have been probably more people killed in the name of making the world a better place than all other causes over history. There's the Spanish Inquisition went on unbelievably for 350 years. Burned at the stake tens of thousands of people in order to save their souls. Right? Doing it for their own good. So, political ideologies, superior races, all that kind of justification causes unbelievable harm. So, I mean, we can look at trying to fix things on sort of a world scale. I mean, we can elect politicians, we can pass laws, empires can come and go, all of that. But as long as we as humanity continue to believe that what we are individually is a separate person, we still haven't got to the root of it. We're still dealing with symptoms, not the cause. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't go out and do what we can. But even then, it's a delicate thing. Where are we coming from when we do that? Are we coming from a compassionate place, or are we coming from a place that I'm right and they're wrong? If we're coming from a place I'm right and they're wrong, I know better, even though I'm trying to help them, then we're still adding to the division energetically. If we're coming from a place of, doing what we can, out of our own sense of abundance and peace and connection with other people, and it looks different, feels different. It's like the, somebody goes over to Africa to feed the hungry people, but they're doing it out of a sense of righteousness or superiority or, it'll look good on my resume or whatever. If there's any kind of motivation that involves, personal gain, however subtle, it has unintended consequences. If it's coming from a place of genuine compassion and outpouring and out of a feeling of abundance, has a different feel. Might look the same on the outside, but it has a different feel to it. So it's just, if we wait for the world to change, to align itself with our, what would make us happy, we've just postponed our happiness, right? We're going to wait for a very, very long time. If we're waiting for the world to change, to become in alignment with my preferences, we'll just wait for a really, really, really long time. The corollary of that is that the condition of the world is preventing my happiness, right? If the world wasn't the way it was, I would be happy. Things would change out there, then I would be happy here. But it's still the same game, right? We're still putting the source of happiness or unhappiness out there. So it's sort of transactional, If something that I like happens out in the world, then I feel happy. If something happens that I don't like, I feel unhappy. So again, we've assigned the source of happiness to the outside events. It's going to go this way sometimes, that way and some other times, and I'm just like a leaf in the wind. Whatever happens, that happens. The other thing to consider is, are you certain that the world just as it is not the perfect setup for our own awakening? If it's all just nice, easy, it's always 75 degrees and sunny, it wasn't cold and frosty first thing in the morning, everything always went our way, there'd be no motivation to do anything different, right? Look at anything different. It's really the friction that causes a certain discomfort in a sense, and it's the discomfort that causes us to look more deeply. It's not just, we like to think like, well, if it was just all blissful, then of course I'd be enlightened, right? It's actually not what awakening is. It's not just like all blissful. It's like seeing that what we are is bigger than both bliss and conflict. Bigger than joy and contraction. It's both. All of that happens within this awareness that we are. Doesn't mean that we, don't prefer one over the other. Doesn't mean that we don't support these activities more than those activities. Doesn't mean that at all. But it means that we're free from being blown about by life circumstances. So rather than waiting for life to come into alignment with my preferences, which not going to happen, we can allow our preferences to just relax to the point that we might still prefer this over that, sure, but we're okay with either. You know, either one doesn't throw us for a loop. You know, again, it doesn't mean that we don't take action, but we don't take action from a sense of reactivity. We take action out of, yes, that's happening. Here's what I can do. Here's what I'm capable of doing. I'll act in this situation, and some other situation I don't have the capacity to do. You know, it doesn't benefit anybody from being anxious about that. So that's what we can do. You know, we can respond as we have the ability to respond, and not be quite so certain that the world is other than it should be. A little chaotic at the moment, but not necessarily. We shouldn't put ourselves in a position of saying it shouldn't be like that, right? You know, sometimes it takes a certain level of disturbance to rearrange things. All right, last but not least, one of the causes of unhappiness is seeking happiness. You wouldn't think it, right? So we only seek what we feel is not present. Right? You know, sometimes if you meet a person is sort of genuinely happy, you know, for not any particular reason, not because they just won the lottery or, you know, just sort of a sunny personality. You know, we can sort of assume that, well, that's sort of just their DNA or something, you know, it's sort of something they were born with, and, you know, good for them. But I'd suggest that it's more just a person's perspective on life, you know, that they're not putting a demand on life to be a certain way in order to be happy. You know, again, they might prefer this or that, but either way, they're okay with it. You know, and it actually, you know, when we're not sort of squandering our time and energy in reactivity to what's happening, we have that much more time and energy to actually respond in a way that is more joyful ourselves, you know, more joyful when we're interacting with other people. You know, if we're wasting all our time and energy sort of wanting things to be different, being anxious, being resentful, all of those things, it just it doesn't leave much left, you know, to actually be present, to respond to whatever the situation calls for. You know, not out of any ideology, but just out of what the situation calls for. In that moment, what is the highest and best response that I can make for the good of everyone involved in that situation? You know, not what's in it for me necessarily. You know, it can be, we don't have to win every round. You know? So just this movement of believing that somehow happiness is based on some object outside of ourselves, that is where happiness resides, is just simply not true. It's very similar to what we did in the meditation this morning, where we just looked at perceptions and realized that those perceptions are happening within us. And how we interpret those perceptions happens within us. It's not in the object themselves. You know, the object themselves doesn't have the power to make us feel one way or the other. You know, we alone have that power. That's the good news, actually. That power resides wholly within us. What perspective are we seeing that from? You know, so just this movement of seeking outside of ourselves for something that will satisfy or fulfill us, just seeing that it never will. It's a promise that's never kept. It will, it doesn't, the objects outside of ourselves are not, they're not actually ever experienced outside of ourselves. That entire experience happens within us, happens within what we are. And we can choose how we react to that or not. And when we realize that we don't have to react to every situation, you know, we can respond when appropriate. That's the freedom. And that is within our power. So we don't have most of us, nearly all of us, you know, don't change the, directions of history on a grand scale, but we do have the power to transform ourselves, to realize what we are already essentially, and that is, it's freeing, it's liberating, but it's also the most beneficial thing that we can do for the world. Our first obligation, before we even try to fix the world, is first do no evil, right? First do no harm. Then we can talk about fixing things, right? So, so that whole journey to self-discovery, discovering what we are already, can feel very personal, like I'm doing it for myself, I'm doing it for my own peace of mind, my own joy. But what we come to realize, it's not actually about that at all, Well, for one thing, there's no separate self. That's one of the things that we discover along the way. There is life being expressed through this unique form, that's true. But that life is who we are, but it's not who we are as a separate self. It's not personal in that way. It's also not impersonal, right? It's not some outside entity that's going to come and invade our bodies, like some horror film. It's who we are already. It's just the realization that it's much bigger than we thought it was. It is actually the entirety of life that's living through each one of these human forms. It feels personal here because that's the mechanism that we have that's looking. But the life energy itself isn't. It's not other than us. So that's actually why Ramana could refer to it as self with a capital S. It's a little confusing, right? Because then there's the personal self with a little s. It's it's not some external, supernatural force that's suddenly invades and comes through these bodies. It's always been life that's been living these bodies. It's just dropping the misperception that what I am is separate. That's the only thing that changes. But that change in perspective changes everything.